want to welcome you to this public conversation that's sponsored by the Center for the Study of Politics and Governance at the Hubert H. Humphrey School of Public Affairs at the University of Minnesota. I'm Larry Jacobs. I'm director of the Center for the Study of Politics and Governance and a faculty of the University of Minnesota. This program is part of our program in election administration. A bit more on that in a second. Today's program will be recorded. It'll be available afterwards, probably tomorrow or maybe later today on both YouTube, and it'll be available also as a podcast. We are so pleased to have a series of terrific programs coming up that I just want to briefly mention. Tom Friedman, the well-known columnist from the New York Times, will be with us next Wednesday at noon Central Time. Tom Friedman will be taking up the question about, is America in decline? And usually with Tom, we will then travel all over the world. So it's an amazing conversation. And he's, of course, an extraordinary columnist and thinker. So excited about that. Then in a few weeks, we're going to have a program during that last week of the election with Vin Weber, who's a very well-known, prominent Republican strategist, and Justin Bowen, who's a Democratic strategist and was the campaign manager for U.S. Senator Amy Klobuchar's presidential race. Now, I want to just take a moment to tell you a little bit about the Certificate in Election Administration, which is sponsoring today's program. We refer to it as CEA. It's a pioneering online program. It's focused on sharing the best practices, both with current election officials and with folks who are interested in getting into the profession. This is an online 12-credit program. The instructors are prominent leaders in election administration, both the national and the state levels, and they include some of the folks on the panel today. So check that out. We've got a lot of information about that. It's available online 24 hours a day, wherever you are in the world, and however it fits into your program. CEA has a strong placement record. Election programs and states and counties are looking for well-trained election officials, and that's where CEA stands to help. If you'd like more information, you can contact Kristen Fabian, who produced today's program, and here's her email address. Now, for today's program, we're very keen to get you involved. We know there are a lot of you out there working in election administration, and so we want to get your questions. They can be anything from a how-to question, here's what I'm dealing with, and we've got some terrific people on the panel today who can answer those questions. You may also have questions as part of the general public about how things are being run and concerns that you might have. I'm very pleased to welcome the moderator of today's program, Wendy Underhill. She is Director of Elections and Redistricting, the National Conference of State Legislatures. Please welcome Wendy Underhill.
Well, thank you, Larry, very much for that start to our fabulous presentation today. I have a couple of thoughts. One is that you speak much more slowly than I do, and I'm going to try to model your voice as we go forward. Those of you who know me know that will last about 1 minute. The other thing is that you have a session coming up on Is America in Decline? And may I just say that when you're thinking about the election administrators of America, the answer is hell no. When I go, everywhere I go, I say, these are the people who make democracy work. These are the people who can put the blinders on, not pay attention to the partisanship, and just do the job at hand. They are brave, strong people, and America is not in decline if you look at election administrators. Okay, that wasn't how I was planning on starting. I was planning on saying something different, which was that really the work you've done is already in the bank. Everything you were going to do to make this election go well, you've already done. You have upturned how you run elections in some states and come up with whole new systems for it. You've dealt with voters who are confused. You've dealt with politicians who are demanding. You have created new processes. You've been dealing with constant changes, but maybe the phrase constant change is an oxymoron. I don't know whether such a thing exists in the world. And you have weathered partisanship like we've never seen before in any election. You've got the mail election part going. You've got the in-person part going. You have done your work. Now you just have to let it unfold. And there aren't that many things you're going to be changing at this point on how you're going to run your elections. What we'll be looking at today with 26 days remaining is what are a few of those things, either how you shift what you're thinking about inside, any messaging you've got, any last minute, not so much tweaks to the process itself, but how you're presenting it and running with it, with an overlay of how are you going to stay calm through these storms coming up ahead. So that's what we're here to do today. I want to introduce our panelists. Their real bios will be forwarded to you so you can find out who they are. But Tammy, just give us a wave. You probably know Tammy, but you probably don't know. She photographs butterflies. And then Commissioner Hovland, give a wave. I want to see you wave. There he is. Okay. And you know that he's the commissioner, the chair of the Elections Assistance Commission, but you probably don't know he's also schooling his children at home along with many of the other parents of America. And Judd, I don't actually see you on my screen. I'm sure you're there. Give a wave. You probably don't know, you do know that Judd is the state election director in Colorado. You probably don't know that he's a fan of Indian food. He and I have had the opportunity to engage in his favorite food a number of times. And then Joe Gloria, give us a wave. He is the election administrator in Las Vegas, huge county there. And you probably don't know that in other years when it's not quite so intense, he loves to cook. So those are the folks you're going to be hearing from today. Our framework is that we'll be looking at voter registration and other pre-election day events. Then we'll be going to look at voting itself. And then we'll look at post-election processing. In previous years, post-election processing was not something anybody gave a hoot about. This year, lots of questions are coming up on that. And we are going to do this entirely with questions. No opening statements from our folks today. Tammy, I'm going to start with you. Tell us a little bit about registration, what you know has been happening this year, given that we've had COVID. Has that changed the number of people who are registering? What's going on?
Thank you for the question. It's great to see everybody and see that everyone is doing well. So in this moment, we know that in a normal times, normal presidential election cycle, we would see supervisors of elections out, doing in-person voter education and registration. We would see advocacy groups going door to door. We would see a lot of activity out in the field with clipboards. That is not happening in this moment. We also know that because of the coronavirus, there are fewer transactions coming through the Department of Motor Vehicles. But the good news is that we are seeing a huge influx of new voter registrations. We just had National Voter Registration Day, 1.5 million voters registered. It was unbelievable, phenomenal. We're hitting the deadlines now in many of the states. And in fact, in some cases, the bandwidth is being exceeded on online voter registration because of the unbelievable turnout. One of the things that we are still seeing, and this is something that we happen to run into very often, is litigation. Litigation around what are the deadlines, are they being extended, and that sort of thing. So everything old is new again, and it's just amped up 2020 style.
Thank you. That's a great lead. And Judd, I'm coming to you next. Can you tell us a little bit about the registration in Colorado? And then if you could pick up on that litigation part, if you know what's going on, give us a little more detail. How unusual is it this year? Is this something other states will be facing in the future? What's going on?
Yeah, on the registration front, we saw a pretty pronounced dip in March and April due to the lockdowns throughout Colorado, and I'm sure that other states saw this as well. Typically, in a given month, we would get around 20,000 transactions through the DMV either through people who were being automatically registered to vote. We have AVR in Colorado, or those people who were coming in specifically to get a form or to register to vote as a consequence of a different interaction at the DMV. And so in 2016, we saw around 20,000 for those months. This cycle, we only saw 6,000 to 8,000, 6,000 in March, 8,000 in April. So that's a pretty significant dip. But the amount of voter reg activity that we're seeing in the last 2 months has been pretty extraordinary. In fact, this last month with National Voter Registration Day, Tammy, hold up your cup. We saw 35,000 transactions on one day in Colorado, which is a big number. Of those, around a fourth were new registrants, and for the entire month of September, we had over 60,000 new registrations, so not updates, but 60,000 new registrations for the month of September. And if you put that together with August, we had over 100,000 new registrants in those 2 months alone. And we're a same-day registration state, so when we get into October, we're going to see a lot more registrations, so we don't have a cutoff. And then on the litigation front, yes, there's tons of litigation, not unusual for a presidential year. I think it is more intense than we've seen in the past. We got sued earlier this week on a registration question, but ours was somewhat different than what I've been talking about. Ours was a list maintenance question, so Judicial Watch sued us for what they believe to be a violation of Section 8, the removal statute, the removal provision of the MVRA, and sadly, they are not really able to read that section all that clearly, because there's another part of Section 8 that doesn't allow us to remove those people they would like us to remove. So we'll have that battle out in U.S. District Court. But those kinds of cases are happening all over the country right now, both on the list maintenance side, but also on the voter reg side, as we saw down in Florida, where they extended their voter reg deadline for several hours because of some system problems that they had.
Judd, when you think about those 100,000 new ones, can you put this in perspective, and maybe you did and I missed it, how is Colorado compared to previous years? Does this look like a blowout in terms of registration? And then talk to us about whether numbers of registrants translates in any way to turnout or expectations of turnout.
Yeah, so let me give you some context. In September of 2016, total number of transactions online voter registration for us. So you go online, make a change, or become a new registrant. We had 68,000 transactions in 1 month in 2016. In 2020, in that same month, we had 222,000 transactions. So that's 160,000 more transactions in that month. Now, there's one little caveat there, which was that election was a week later. So if you think about how the calendar is working out, so you would expect that you would have seen more transactions in October than in September in that cycle. Mm-hmm. But still, that can't possibly account for 160,000 transactions. So the interest level is incredibly high. And I've been saying this in other forums, so I'm not making news today, but I absolutely believe that some state somewhere, I think it might be Colorado, will get to 80% turnout of eligible population in this election. It'll probably be us. It might be Minnesota. It'll be one of the states that do really well in turnout. And 80% is higher than any state's ever gotten in a presidential election before, or in any election before, frankly. And I think we can believe that that's possible just because of the amazing interest and then many of the policies that are adopted by states, which are increasing turnout.
So that makes me wonder if what we've been saying for years, that who's on the ballot or what are the voters interested, is what drives turnout more than election policy or any other factors. So we have a highly engaged public this year. So maybe that's a little tiny bit of a silver lining for what's otherwise a contentious and complicated year. Joe, I want to turn to you for just a moment. Joe actually runs elections. I myself have never run an election. I'm election administrator wannabe. Maybe that'll be my next career. Joe, first talk to us about registration briefly. Are your trends in Nevada the same as what Judd sees in Colorado? But then I want you to talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing about the observers, the number of people who are coming to you asking for information on how it works and what that means for you.
Interestingly enough, our numbers are pretty similar to what Judd was talking about. This is the first year that we've introduced the use of AVR, which has been a challenge since DMV's had trouble serving the constituents and having to slow down because of the lockdown. I would have been excited to see what would have happened had we not had to experience the pandemic this year. But our numbers are definitely up and people are engaged and want to make sure that they're eligible to vote. This will also be the first year that we introduce same-day registration. So we're following in the footsteps of Colorado and the access that we're providing here in the state of Nevada. Can't quite tell you exactly what that will mean for us in the general because we didn't really have a dry run in the primary based on what we had to do to address the pandemic with going all mail here in the state of Nevada. But our numbers are definitely up and we're expecting to see a high level of turnout. As far as what activity looks like it's going to be for observers, more than in any other election that I've seen, there's a general interest in coming in and making sure that people are able to monitor what we're doing. We're working hard to be transparent and take advantage of that increase in people's wanting to be there to observe what we're doing so that we can use that as a tool to strengthen the integrity of our process and explain to people exactly how elections get run so that the falsehoods that are out there or just people that don't know exactly what we do to put on an election can get answered. And so that what we're putting together now is different, definitely, because we've usually had to focus more on observers participating during our early voting cycle in the in-person process and also on election day. But we've got large numbers of people who are interested in coming in and watching our mail process now, since we're providing all active registered voters a mail-in ballot, which we're hoping that they take advantage of so that we don't get stressed at the polls because we have to deal with social distancing and everything that's going on as a result of the pandemic. But we've got materials together so that we can use it as a tool to inform voters so that hopefully they'll leave our facility and communicate to people in their interest groups that, hey, we monitored and we watch what they're doing and you can have trust in what they're doing at the election department, and you should trust that there's a high level of integrity and that they're working to uphold it on a daily basis.
Well, I see a note in the chat box saying that you guys in Nevada are doing a great job, and I certainly will second that. It strikes me that you want voters to be interested in what the process is. You invite them in, oh my goodness, and then you're overwhelmed. So you have to kind of stay on the upside. That part of your job in these last 3 weeks is educating reporters, I would say, and the public, a lot of advocacy groups out there on what the processes are. I wish you well in getting enough sleep, given how many people are knocking on your door for that kind of thing.
We'll save that for after the election.
sleep later. Okay, Chairman Hovland, you, like me, don't actually run elections. What you do though, is you engage nationwide on what does election security mean. So could you talk to us a little bit about that? It almost feels to me like it's fallen out of the national dialogue, and yet that's where a good deal of the action is going to be.
Yeah, thanks, Wendy. And part of this conversation has already made me think back to back in January, the EAC had a kickoff summit. Tammy was actually on a panel I moderated there, a quaint little topic about, preparing for high turnout in this year. And of course, cybersecurity was a lot of the focus as well. And you think, now what we didn't know, of course, with COVID coming and how that's impacted the elections. But you're absolutely right. I mean, the issue of cybersecurity hasn't gone away. That continues to be an issue. But I think the way that we've seen it materialize most significantly so far this year is in the misinformation, disinformation space. A lot of what Joe was talking about a second ago, with educating voters, educating groups is a big part of the response to that. But anyone who's paid any attention to elections this year has undoubtedly seen some of the volume of misinformation and disinformation that's out there. Whether that is, we continue to see that from foreign adversaries spreading disinformation, amplifying divisions, amplifying information about the process that is incorrect. But then you also see, you see the misinformation. I've taken to saying recently, social media doesn't stop at the state line. And really, you think about, what is good. I've seen a number of things from, friends and places I used to live or whatever, and it says, oh, do X. And it's like, well, that's not applicable to me. And so you think about just the impact of that as our lives intertwine in this way. And you do have this variation with the 50 states, each running elections in their own unique way. So, every year voter education matters, but I think with the changes this year, with the amount of disinformation and misinformation that we're seeing, getting out a good, clear message of how people participate, just the basics. And again, we've been very happy to participate in the National Association of Secretary of State driven Trusted Info 2020 effort. It's a big deal, again, getting people to that correct information about how they can engage. So, really, I think that has stood out so far to me this year.
I can't second that more, that misinformation is kind of what we're seeing. It also feels like that's something that's outside of the purview of local election officials, or maybe that the only way they can be responsive on that is to produce as best they possibly can accurate information. Have you got any other thoughts about that? How does a local election official deal in that world?
Yeah, absolutely. I think getting the right information out there is a piece of that. And then I think looking for opportunities potentially to amplify that. Again, relationships with local media matter. We've seen a lot of outreach from other elected officials who've reached out to the EAC, mayors, others looking, might be a little bit more known. I know from working in a Secretary of State's office years ago, there were a lot of people that didn't exactly know who we were or what we did, but other elected officials who are able to amplify the trusted source that is your state and local election officials, I think that can go a long way. Again, but it is certainly a challenge. I think we've also seen, certainly there's plenty of room to pick on the social media companies and a lot of things that I'd like to see them do better. I do think you've seen some of them step up this year. There was some really, I think Twitter yesterday had some, Q&A sessions with state election directors, with secretaries of state. There's been more of an effort in that regard, which I think is a good thing. And again, a lot of people have joined in on the Trusted Info 2020 campaign. And I think getting that message out matters.
Understood. And the other thing I just want to pick up on is I think your thing about social media doesn't stop at the state line. I think what's going to happen is not only what happens in one county will be blamed on the whole state. What happens in some other state will be brought home to you with, well, this is a problem. So the more we can have all of the election administration world operating at the highest level, the better it is for everybody. To our audience, I want to say that you're welcome to put questions in the chat box. We'll take them as we go along. And then let's move on to actual voting. And Ben, I'm going to start with you while we've got you up on the screen. What's the lay of the land in terms of shifting from in-person voting to outside the polling place voting? Is it shifting back? What's going on this year?
Well, a lot. For a while, I think one of the, what we saw out of the primaries, and I think one of the absolute lessons learned is that we're going to set mail and absentee ballot records, through the roof this year. I think, there was a little bit of question marks that got flagged there, but you still continue to see a ton of use of mail. It's how I voted, but you also see, I voted early sticker, so I'm ready. But you also are just seeing a lot of interest in early in-person as well, which is great. I think I saw at the University of Florida today, at least 6.2 million people have already voted this year. That's an amazing number. I think if you're in a state that hasn't started early voting, I think what you can see from the states that have is get ready for a surge when it starts. Everywhere that has started, that first day has been very busy. I think that goes back just to the level of interest there is this year. Again, I think what Judd said, we're going to set records this year. And so it's how you accommodate that. Again, I think the message is getting through to have people spread that out some.
Mhm.
Again, we also know that people that are waiting in an early voting line are happier than somebody waiting on an election day line. Again, important to continue to drive people to spread out, whether that is mail absentee, whether that's early in person. And certainly that will help with, allowing for social distancing and trying to limit congestion. I think that's the story of this year is we're seeing people pick those options, but they're doing it in big numbers.
You brought to my attention curbside and drive-through voting a while ago. So a few places are trying those things. And basically, I think what's happening is that we're flattening the curve this year, and voters individually are making the choices about that. Tammy, I want to ask you a little bit about polling places. Do you have concerns about how many people will try to be in a polling place? Something about all of the people who are official observers versus unofficial observers. What are you looking for this year, whether it's early in-person voting or election day voting?
Every year, every big election cycle, we have a renewed interest from both sides of the aisle on having individuals in the polls, watching, observing, sometimes as quote unquote challengers. And this year is no different. But I do think that in this moment, we have to kind of take a little bit of a pause and understand where our society has been in the last few months, that we have seen some real concerns around some people being activated to perhaps try and do something that's not legal. And so it's critical that everyone knows that there are sanctioned observer roles in every state, both inside of the polling place as well as what is authorized and legal outside of the polling place, what is considered electioneering and what is considered voter intimidation. So voters should feel safe in going to the polls, and election officials have thought this through in the past, and so they're dusting off some of those contingency plans should someone try and do something that is not in fact legal. In this moment, we also have the situation where we have additional complications around CDC requirements, how many individuals can be in an enclosed place at any given time. So we've always had fire marshal rules and regulations, and those are a little bit more complicated this time around. That's why it's so important that we do, in fact, spread out the vote, having more people vote by mail, having people go to early in-person voting sites. That's all going to be really important. But one of the other aspects that I think doesn't get talked about enough with this is that the role of the observer, whether they're international observers or political party observers, is really to make sure that voters are being well served and that their rights are being upheld. And the transparency of all of our processes is really critical in this moment to make sure that voters do have confidence in the outcome of the race, in the integrity of the electoral process. So the observers, we might see people show up to be observers this year. In the jurisdiction I was in, we had about 2 million registered voters, a little more than 1,100 polling places, and every presidential election we heard there were going to be legions of observers. I trained dozens of them, and a handful would show up and they'd last about an hour and say, "This is boring, I'm going home." So we'll see what happens this year, but there are policies and procedures in place to make sure that no one is there to interrupt the process.
If we want our airplane rides to be boring and we want our polling places to be boring.
I want every day to be boring. I am sick of all this excitement. Can we just go back to mundane, boring times again, please? Just for a day or two. That's all I ask.
Somewhere later in the winter, we'll get there, Tammy. Judd, when we had our prep call, you talked a little bit about people with campaign paraphernalia, and you had some practical tips. This isn't about the legalities exactly, it was the practicalities. Can you take us there again, please?
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting question. It's kind of, if you're a lawyer out there or interested in constitutional law, there's a real kind of needle to thread on these kinds of questions. So most states have, and perhaps even all states have, laws against electioneering at polling places. So this is wearing a, vote for Joe Biden T-shirt, or we have a number of initiatives on the ballot. So if you had a shirt that said, vote for the wolves in Colorado, that would be a shirt that would be electioneering, because we have literally wolves on the ballot. So that's sort of one bucket of the kinds of things that we anticipate we're going to see at elections on election day and in early voting. But then there's a much trickier question, and that is, what do you do with somebody who wears a Make America Great Again hat? So technically that's not saying vote for Donald Trump, but it is very much a phrase that's associated with Donald Trump. So is that something that you can regulate? We've come to the conclusion in Colorado that it's something that we don't feel comfortable regulating. It's pretty close to being electioneering, and maybe it even is electioneering. But it also feels like the kind of thing that if you're telling people to take off that hat and they're making an argument back to you that they have a First Amendment right to wear that hat, that you're engaging in the wrong conversation at a polling place. And so that we should really try to avoid that. I totally understand if somebody goes the other way on that, and I know a number of states are going the other way. But in Colorado, we've concluded that that's a First Amendment right that you can wear that hat. California, by the way, also sides with us on that, and has written out a pretty detailed explanation of their understanding of the law. So, but it is a tricky question, and I think it goes the other way too. A Black Lives Matter T-shirt might be interpreted in various ways by people on the other side of that spectrum. So I think that makes for a very tricky environment, and elections officials really have to kind of walk a very thin line on how they deal with those kinds of issues. I'm sure Joe and his team face these kinds of questions all the time, because you want to create a safe environment where people don't feel intimidated, where they can come in, cast their ballot, but at the same time, you don't want to restrict somebody's ability to speak their mind in a way that doesn't conflict with state law. So that's a very tricky little dance, and I know a lot of Colorado jurisdictions. In fact, I see a couple of familiar names in the list of people who are attending this particular event. But I know a lot of our Colorado officials are trying to figure that out themselves. It's a tricky dance, and we're just trying to provide as much direction as we can at the state level, understanding that we might not get every one of these right. We might find ourselves in court over them. We might find people getting really angry about it. But at the same time, you do what you can, and you try to help your local officials as much as you can, and then you sort of let the chips fall where they may.
All right. And then that gets us to Joe, who's actually running elections. What are you preparing for?
Well, unfortunately, we're preparing to have to respond to a group of people whose sole intent is to come in and try to disrupt the polling place based on what's going on at a national level. It's been my experience that in dealing with observers, most of them are just interested in finding out exactly what's going on and disproving what they've heard might be going on. And so when you have a conversation with a rational observer, you can usually explain to them exactly what's going on with the process. And they generally back off. And as Tammy said, they get bored and leave. But I think there will be an exception this year. And so there's a lot of preparation and making sure that we have the tools in place to respond so that we can keep order at the polling places, because it's absolutely critical that we do that, and that we make sure that voters don't feel uncomfortable if they choose to come in and vote in person. So there's a lot of work that's been done here through coordinating with local law enforcement. We want to make sure that they're briefing their officers, making sure that they're aware of what actions constitute illegal actions as far as electioneering or disrupting the polling place. As Judd said, all states have some type of electioneering protocols to follow. So we have our own, but I guess our main concern here is making sure that we have the resources in place to respond quickly, and hoping that there aren't nefarious plans to try to overrun us because of the number of observers at different locations. But that goes into planning. And Tammy said we're dusting off those plans. Those plans have been there for a while. We just haven't had to respond to them to the level that I think that we're going to have to this year. And so being prepared in that fashion and making sure that the community, as far as those people who can assist us in making sure that we keep order, are ready to do so.
And I think that makes perfect sense. We can't prepare for everything. Witness the pandemic. We didn't know what to do on March 14th or whatever, but we can prepare for a lot of things. And we've been asked at NCSL by the National Police Foundation to do a 50-state survey of laws about police and polling places. What's so interesting is that they're planning on doing messaging out to their members, which are police chiefs. And the goal is to say to them, in many states, the answer is you're not supposed to have police at a polling place. In other states, they may assign one person to them. So I guess a thought I'm having is that election officials such as yourself, one of the preparatory things they can do is get to know their chief of police if they don't already and have this conversation. Looks like you've already done that.
Absolutely. That's one of the main things that we look at prior to an election. And again, we definitely don't have plans to have police officers, law enforcement at every polling place, but that is our last step. If we've done everything that we can to try to explain to observers that they are breaking the law and they are disrupting the polling place, and if they don't change their actions and follow the rules that are prescribed to them, that we're going to have to call law enforcement, and we will do so, and they will have to be removed.
Hey, Wendy, can I throw in something here that's, so it's not to pick on anyone, but the historically, Democrats in our state have been very concerned about having uniform police present at polling places. And so, in fact, we've been threatened on occasion that a lawsuit might be coming because there is a police officer sitting in a polling place all day in a particular location, let's say a location where there are more Hispanic voters or younger voters. And so the Democratic Party has been concerned about that over the years. I'm getting calls now from the Democratic Party saying the exact opposite, saying, hey, we are really worried about voter intimidation at these polling places. Have you considered putting uniformed police officers? And so the world is upside down and turned around. It is a really interesting dynamic right now. And it is, I find that I just try to continue to float downstream and not wander toward either one of the two banks, because when you sort of try to adopt these policies that feel like they're one size fit all, actually they really kind of pin you in. And in the same way that we weren't active on the police side in previous elections where people had concerns on one end, we're trying not to be active on that other end. We're, as Joe described, we're trying to be smart about individual situations. So when I need to be aggressive in a particular situation, that's when we make the call, not trying to create these uniform policies that then we kind of live to regret.
Flexibility and nimbleness, I think, is a word that's being used this year. So you've got to think about these things in advance, but game them out in more than one way. I'm going to go to a couple of the questions now. And one of them is, I'm going to go to you, Ben, on it. I'm sorry, Chairman Hovland. With this year's growth in early voting and voting related litigation, which we've already talked about, do you estimate that that there will be substantial delays in the determination of the national and local winners?
I think that that's a really good question, and one that there are a lot of factors on. Certainly, I think first and foremost, we've been emphasizing, a lot of people have been emphasizing, that election night results are always unofficial. And there's very good reasons for that, as everybody knows. But I do think that's important. And then, of course, because of course it varies across the state. So is your state a postmark deadline or a received by election day deadline? If you're a postmark state, how long do you allow for after that? What's your cure process? What are your provisionals like? There's just so many elements that are, and then of course, what's the margin? There's going to be a lot of elements to it, but one of the things that we've really been trying to emphasize is just helping the public to understand the processes that are involved. The thing that I've been saying about the canvass and certification process is, that it's dotting the I's, crossing the T's, and double checking the math, and it really is just, or I've talked about again the good old days when technology's come a little ways since I was in the secretary's office, but I remember counties either calling in, faxing in, sending us their results that we were going to put up on our election night reporting website, and maybe you'd gotten into the office at 4 or 5 in the morning, and it's now 1 o'clock, and all of a sudden you flip an 18 to an 81, and that is a big difference in some races. And so again, we all like that instant gratification. People want that, and as a good governance, customer service type of thing, it has been tried to be. I think offices provide that, but again, because it's unofficial and it is just trying to give an inclination, I think it's important for people to be patient. Certainly, I know a lot of folks have been talking about that, which is good, but again, I think the more that we can talk about sort of the back end process and explain the whys of that, what varies in jurisdictions, what the process looks like, I think it helps people understand that and hopefully limit the jumping to various other conclusions that are not helpful.
If I could jump in on that, Wendy,
yeah, please.
just one thing real quick. I've heard Ned Foley of Ohio State University posit it this way, which I think is a great way to talk about it, is that in this moment, on election night, the media usually forecasts the winner. And in this moment, there might be a delay of the forecast of the winner, but we're not delaying any of the results because we always go through all of these same procedures after election day. It's just that normally the media has forecast and projected who the winner is going to be. And so that's what could be delayed in this moment, depending on how quickly voters get their ballots back in. So we know we've already had, what was the amount already today? 6 million voters have voted for the majority of states. And I believe Judd is definitely in this case. I think Joe is as well, my former state of Arizona. When those ballots start coming back in many cases, as soon as they test their tabulation equipment, they can start processing ballots, doing signature verification. So on the night of November 3rd, when the holograms hit the screens, many of those totals are going to be vote by mail and absentee ballots that have been processed and scanned in and finally accumulated and tabulated. So if voters really want to have an answer, get the ballots back in as quickly as possible.
I love that. It's very much the voter's choice on that piece. I will say, though, that it seems like a lot of the litigation around the return of ballots has been about extending the period after Election Day. So in Colorado, the ballots have to be in hand. And so some states will be having ballots coming in for days after. So there can be some slow results. Tammy, while I've got you, I want to ask a question from Sarah. What role do you see outside organizations and nonprofits playing? Do you see any data that tells whether those organizations are markedly turning out more voters? And you support some of those, I think. So I want to just let you take that one.
Great, thank you. So yeah, Democracy Fund does have a number of grantees that work on a variety of both voter education efforts and providing them with tools to make informed choices, knowing where their polling places are, what to do in order to request a vote by mail ballot, that sort of thing. And I think that that's a really important role for every advocacy group and organization in this moment where over the last 100 years, our political parties have lessened the amount of activity that they do in that regard. So it used to be 100 years ago that, the political parties had precinct committee people that registered voters in their precincts, that were involved in turning out the vote. And there's been a shift away from some of that bipartisan ship to more independent voters, more voters who are unaffiliated. And so we do need nonpartisan actors in the field to help with that message, as long as they're aligning and making sure that what they're promoting is correct and accurate in each of their jurisdictions and states. Because unfortunately, far too often this year so far, we've seen efforts that have been misguided, where wrong information was being disseminated, not because it was intentionally being disseminated as incorrect information, because we have seen some of that as well, but where information was just wrong. So absentee ballot requests going back to the wrong counties or jurisdictions in Virginia and some other things. So there is a very vibrant role for everyone to play in this moment, particularly because our elections offices, both at the state and local level, are under-resourced. And one of the first things that used to get cut at our level had to do with cutting out any kind of outreach and publicizing things. We certainly were not having any sort of budget to do a big marketing campaign on television, that sort of thing. So we do need to have everybody engaged in getting out the right message so that everyone knows what their options are, particularly as those options are changing in this moment.
I'm so glad you brought up the resources. I'm going to just assume that everyone on this call recognizes that under-resourced is a very calm way to say we don't have what we need to be able to get this entire job, including the public education piece, done. And I think Chairman Hovland will be looking for federal money next year, and let's hope some of it comes down to the state and the local level. Let's hope our legislators help out, and certainly the county boards. This is something that elections have always been funded at all three levels. That'll probably continue into the future. So this is an excellent year to make that ask when you can see all of the hard work that's gone by. The people who hold the purses might be better prepared. Jules, I want to answer your question about, is it permissible to divide your vote and vote for some candidates on the Democratic side and some on the Republican side? Absolutely, yes. In most of them of the United States, our ballots don't even give you an option to do a straight party vote. So absolutely, you can choose one candidate for, you choose the president from one party, everybody else candidate by candidate. And when voters have enough knowledge to be able to split their vote, that means that they've been doing their homework. Now I want to turn to Joe. We've got a question from Paul. And his question is, with regards to absentee mail voting, the bigger challenge to fraud seems to be errors that people make. So Joe, you have most recently shifted from mostly mail to, mostly in person to mostly mail. So how are you helping your voters understand how to do their process properly? And are you able to give them a chance to cure if there is a problem with the signature on the envelope?
Sure, getting up to speed on that and catching up to Judd and what he does in Colorado has been a difficult task for us, but we've done the best we can. A lot of what we've done has been outreach. We've created videos that are available on our website and that we share with our community partners in the media, showing everybody exactly what the mail ballot packet looks like, everything that's included in the mail ballot packet, and then walking through the actual process of voting the ballot. And with that, indicating to them what they don't want to do, because sometimes the people who are out in the community trying to help voters confuse them by saying even simple things like, make sure you sign your ballot, which is a little confusing because you definitely don't want them to identify the ballot, which creates an issue for us. You need to sign your return envelope. So that's one of the points that we certainly make. And then in each state jurisdiction, it's a little bit different on what exactly is outlined for voters to make a correction on their ballot should they inadvertently select a candidate that they didn't want to make. So that was another area that we really emphasized on, and letting them know exactly how the correct method is to correct and change to another candidate on the ballot. But that outreach is I think, done a lot of good here in Clark County. We did a little bit of it also in the primary, and we're hoping that people would take advantage of those tools and share them. And even now, in leading into the election, we've been doing a lot of media work, getting out information on exactly what they need to do, follow the instructions, and understand that you don't have to put that in the U.S. mail. We have several Dropbox locations available for those of you who are concerned along those lines. So getting all that information out is key to making sure that voters know what tools are in place for them to make sure they get their ballot in and counted.
Okay, that was great. We've heard from Brian that perhaps there is a plot to kidnap the governor of Michigan. I have not heard that prior, but it does make me recognize that this is the year where concerns about safety in the polling places are a little higher up than they otherwise have been. For instance, the National Federation of Police is asking us to do a 50-state roundup of the laws, and some laws, some states like yours, Joe, have open carry laws. Can you talk at all about that? And this is a question that would not have come up 2 years ago or 4 years ago or 6 years ago. Any thoughts about open carry and polling places?
Sure, and in Nevada, it is an open carry state, so it's something that we have to deal with, and all of our rovers that we send out into the field have to be, or have the ability to just talk to those individuals who decide to come in open carry. Obviously, we're going to let them vote, but they can't do anything that would intimidate anybody in line. So we communicate with those folks usually. If I'm on site, I'll personally go up and talk with them and just kind of get to know them. It's the folks who intend to stand all day and observe or be at the electioneering line at 100 feet that sometimes causes a concern, but they're perfectly within their rights to bear that weapon. And so we have to make a judgment call with every situation, because we'll definitely get calls from people who are concerned or feel intimidated, and weigh that as to whether or not they're carrying out any actions that we feel might intimidate voters, and let them know that if they are doing things that is raising concern, that we'd have to ask them to remove the weapon or leave the location. So it's really a case-by-case basis, but we have to deal with that.
All right. So I'd like to ask each of our panelists to talk a little bit about something that they think a local election official could do now, between now and election day. I'd given the idea earlier of being in touch with your chief of police, but there are lots of other things. Tammy, what's on your mind first on this?
I would be remiss if I didn't say make sure you're talking to your local post office and your election mail specialist, because I think I'd lose, like, I don't know, some kind of street cred if I didn't say something about the Postal Service. But I do think that when we think about what to prepare for post-election day is to make sure that everyone knows there's going to be questions around what's outstanding. So think about your plan for after election day as you're continuing to process either provisional ballots, absentee ballots, vote by mail ballots, military ballots coming in, setting up a set time every day where you're going to brief the press, set up that you're going to let them know to the best of your ability what number of ballots are outstanding and your timeline for X, Y, and Z. When are you going to know what the final results are going to be? What is it that's outstanding? What are the changes that could be happening between one day and the next? And I think setting that up in advance and thinking about what you want to report, knowing what the data points you want to have and what the media and what your general public will want will be critical moving forward.
All right, that was great. Ben, can I come to you? What's your advice for local election officials at this point in the process?
First, I'd say thank you and hold on. No, certainly it's, it has been a tough year, and the work that has been just really awesome to see how the elections community has come together to respond to the pandemic. But I think the biggest thing at this point, echoing a lot of what Tammy just said, I think where there's opportunities to provide transparency and get out accurate information, that helps. It helps local media partners. It helps others push back on that information, which has I think it has the potential to have a ripple effect where you are playing less defense, hopefully. If you're setting out, if there are those expectations that you're providing certain information of where things are and it's accurate and people know that they can go get that from you, I think that helps to push back on some of the issues we've seen where people are questioning the process or putting out incorrect information. So.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Judd, I'm going to ask you the same thing, but if you could just mention what goes on with overseas voters while you're at it, that would be great.
Yeah, so military and overseas ballots went out on September 19th in Colorado, and in every state it needed to be either in the mail or provided electronically by that date. Many military and overseas voters are already voting. We in Colorado have received over 2,000 ballots back, I think now, from our military and overseas voters. We have 32,000 total UOCAVA. So for this early in the cycle, that's very good. And in fact, I think that number is from like Monday, so it's probably much higher than that now. So we take that group of voters very seriously, because they are very dependent on us doing our jobs well. We try to provide, in Colorado, we provide an electronic way for people to receive their ballots, to vote them, and to return them through a secure Dropbox. So that's something that we're pretty proud of, and something that we've made available to our UOCAVA voters. Also for people that have a disability or are bedbound, housebound. So the kinds of things that if I were talking to a local election official, I might emphasize to them at this late date, and I know I have a couple of my all-star local election officials on this call. I would emphasize to them that really for the first time that I can ever remember, you need to be thinking not so much about what's happening inside your building, but you need to be thinking about what's happening outside of your building. So you probably should be talking to your local police. You should be talking or preparing for having additional judges who can be watching what's happening outside of your election location, outside of your VSPC. We call our polling places VSPCs. And then because electioneering and voter intimidation associated with electioneering may very well be a serious problem this election. So that's slightly unusual, something that typically we wouldn't be focusing on. I think watchers, even in more rural parts of the state, are very possible. Typically in Colorado, we would expect to see a lot of watchers in the Front Range region, and maybe in a couple of our more populous states out west, or counties out west, but not so much in some of the more rural parts of the state. Honestly, this year, I would expect watchers in virtually every county. And so you need to be up to date with what your watcher policies are, how you deal with watchers. Even if you have virtually no experience dealing with a watcher, you need to be prepared for that. So there are various things that contingency planning that you need to be set for, that perhaps is not muscle memory for you. And so you need to be thinking a little bit outside of your traditional box.
And Joe, I'm going to skip you because you are a local election official. So I know you could give advice to the others, but we're coming up close to the end of the hour. So I want to thank our panelists, and I want to thank everybody who's been on the call with your questions. There was something about Dropboxes. If you want to email me later, I'll be happy to give some more information about Dropboxes. Kristen, let's go to our wrap-up slide. And I just want to say, as we're pulling this up, that you can go to the CEA for more information about their program. And this will be recorded. And Kristen will answer those emails, I'm pretty sure, that go into cspg@umn.edu. And I think our panelists are probably all happy to continue to be in conversation with you as well. And the fact that you chose to spend an hour in October with us, I feel like that was a precious hour in your life, and I so much appreciate you being with us. And I also think that our panelists provided some really good, concrete, in this moment information. I'll just mention one more resource. It's called Bridging Divides Initiative. It is looking at what are predictors of any political or electoral violence that might be of some use. Now, having said that, I want to take my last 30 seconds and say that the time is now to be calm, to do the thing that you know is most important, put the blinders on to the things that aren't important in your universe, and proceed. And we're going to see each other all on the other side of the election. It's going to go not without a hitch. There's never been an election that goes without a hitch, but it's going to go well. With that, stay calm, stay in touch, and stay focused on what needs to happen now. Thank you.